I remember flying up through Arctic Canada in a Cirrus, one of the early ones, one of the early Cirruses. And the big thing that differentiated the Cirrus between, other GA airplanes like Pipers and Cessnas and things like that was that it had the parachute. And I thought, well, I'm never going to be using that. That's silly. Um, but I did find myself in, out of radio range in Arctic Canada, just to the, where was it, northeast of Shabugamu, and could with nobody, and ended up getting into really bad icing, unforecast, nothing on the chart, and so I had no idea where the quickest exit was. Well, this was nighttime, and below me were mountains, high mountains. And so you think, okay, well, this isn't looking great. And I can't talk to anybody, and I'm not really sure where I am. And I've got a vague idea, but I don't know where the peaks are. It got so bad that, the whole airplane was covered in ice, and I just thought, well, the only way is down, and it'll be down until I hit something. But then I thought, well, okay, I've got the parachute. So at least if I came down this way instead of going in this way, perhaps it would be survivable. And so I was ready to pull that parachute, and so I just had to figure out when.
Before we get started, Steve, why don't you just take us through your career? Maybe give us a short overview, maybe like 60 seconds of your career, who you are, what you did. That'd be great.
Okay, well, I'm 54 now, so doing 60 seconds of a career is going to be 1 second per, and I've already wasted 8 seconds. You
All
see how
right.
it works? So strap in.
All right. Will do.
So let's see. The basics are, so currently I'm a 737 captain for Alaska Airlines, and that's the route to that was a strange one, a weird one. It started when I was very young. When I was 9 years old, I went on a school trip, and that school trip was for me overseas. It was basically to a Channel island. It was an island off of the coast of France. I grew up in the south of England, and so we took this little old turboprop airliner from the 60s over to this Channel island. It was only maybe a 45-minute flight or something, but that flight initially wasn't anything exciting. It didn't trigger anything in my brain. It didn't say, "Wow, you need to be a pilot." What it did for me was it created a moment, and that moment was when we attempted to make the approach into the one of the Channel Islands. We couldn't because it was fogged in. We couldn't land, so we diverted to another island called Jersey, and we shot the approach. And I was looking out the window as a 9-year-old, and what I saw was that we were in the clouds, and I was looking out for this strange land that was overseas and away from my home. And what I actually saw out of the window was cloud, 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 cloud. The wheels came down, cloud, cloud, cloud. Flaps came down, and I couldn't see the ground. And it seemed to me that the last second we saw the ground and we landed, and that was the piece, that was the trigger, that was when the lightning bolts were going off, and the question started: how did they see the runway? How did we come out of the clouds? And a second later, as far as I was concerned, as a 9 year old, a second later we were on the runway. That's impossible to me. So that started my journey. um Unfortunately, back then, I my parents, for all of the great will in the world, they had no money. That we didn't grow up with money in the family. You're expected to go get a job, any job, just go contribute. But if you would say, "Oh, I think I'm going to become an airline pilot, or I'm going to become a fast jet pilot, or something like that," those things are impossible. Let's go do something more realistic. Well, it started a journey, that I knew that I wanted to fly. I had to fly, and had to figure out a way to fly. And what presented itself was the Air Training Corps, which was sort of a junior Royal Air Force. It would be equivalent to ROTC of in the US, I think, something like that for, to bring kids into the military environment. And that opened up an opportunity, which was to have a flight, to have an air experience flight. And that flight was done when I was 14, and I turned up at this airfield, and in this old rickety 1950s de Havilland Chipmunk, which is a tandem seat. I sat behind the pilot, strapped into this big parachute, with this big helmet on that didn't fit me, and it was a tail dragger. If you sort of from the designed in the 1940s, and we went up for a 25-minute flight, and that flight only added to this desire to go fly, because I realized, number one, I loved it. But then also, as part of those air experience flights, the pilot would then give the controls to you, and you would go fly around. And I then realized, oh, I can actually do this. I know I can do this, but I didn't know how I could do it, because the easy way would be write a check and go get a pilot's license, and go get a commercial pilot's license, and go get an instrument rating, and go join an airline. And I couldn't do that. So the second part of that was, well, let's join an airline that will pay for my flying. Well, in the UK, that was British Airways. And every year 60,000 people would apply, and three would go on a course. It was that sort of, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was that sort of prospect. So that wasn't any good. The third option was to have the Queen pay for my flying, so join the Royal Air Force. That was quickly stopped, unfortunately, because of my eyesight, because I had my literal sights set on as everybody does, as a young kid. I want to be a fast jet pilot. I want to hurtle around at Mach 2 with my bum on fire. And so that's what I focused on. Even though I knew realistically, well, maybe any flying job would be perfect. I'd take any flying job. Well, unfortunately, because of my eyesight, they wouldn't allow me to join back then as in a flying role, or even apply. So the recruitment officer said that that's not an option for you. So what else would you like to do in the military? And because I was so focused on this flying thing, I just said no. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to find some other path, and that other path turned up when, by accident, my dad, who was a part-time photographer, um, went to a kitchen showroom to take some photos of this kitchen showroom. And the guy that owned this showroom, in his office, he had this, behind his wall, he had a photo of him with this another really old airliner called a Vickers Viscount, four-engine propeller, old airliner, and this guy in a captain's uniform in front of it in the picture. And so I started to talk to him, and his advice, which with hindsight I don't know if it was great advice, but his advice was, go get a job, make some money, go get your pilot's license, and then apply to the airlines already qualified with a pilot's license. And maybe that will give you the step up that you're looking for. And so that's what I did. And so then got into a career. I ended up in finance, repossessing cars and issuing personal loans, and all sorts of crazy things. And unfortunately, then got stuck in the career, trying to build a career, and did very well at it. And as a side, from the career, I then was able to pay for my pilot's license, and I got, my instrument, and I did all of these things purely for fun. I sort of lost my focus about where I was heading, in other words, or where I wanted to head, as in a professional pilot. And I sort of lost my way, and got involved in the career, and sort of built a career, um, up until I had another one of those moments. when they gave me a corner office. It wasn't very fancy. It was just happened to be in a corner of a building, and that corner overlooked the airport that I did my first solo at, Eastleigh Airport, which is Southampton Airport now, in the south of England, and it overlooked that runway, and that reminded me why what I was doing this for, why I was working, what this advice that this guy had given me um, was supposed to have led to, and so yeah, I um, after the end of the century, so in the late 90s, I decided, okay, I'm just going to quit my fancy job and I'm going to go join an airline, and and that began the airline process. Um, I had a good friend who was working for an Irish carrier, and he said, "Yeah, we'll hire you," because that's how interviews were done then. It was sort of a, "Yeah, sure, okay, we let's have a beer together, and we'll, yeah, come and see us for an interview, and we'll take you on." And so yeah, so then I went over to Ireland to go join this airline flying 737s, funny enough, 737-200s. And uh, as part of that move, I had to convert my UK pilot's license to an Irish pilot's license because at that time there were individual states. It would almost be sort of Kansas flying certificate, and if you wanted to work in North Dakota, you would have to go and get a North Dakota flying certificate. It's really, really silly. But the harmonization of the European license hadn't taken place by them. Um, and so I had to go and get this, go do another medical, another flight test, and those sort of things. And as part of the medical process, that's where I found out that the Irish Aviation Authority were pretty much the one of the first to implement the new joint European regulations for medical standards as part of what would become the integrated combined licensing scenario. Um, and uh, and my laser surgery that I had had several years before to help to correct my vision um, was not acceptable under the new rules. Under the old rules, sure. Under the new rules, no. And so that that started another part of my career. How's this 60 seconds doing, by the way?
We're a little bit over, but you
A
can
little
keep
bit
going. That's
over.
fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll wrap this bit up and then then we can.
Nah, you're doing great. I
All
love these
right.
stories. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so I found myself because of a piece of bureaucracy, basically, um, just because of the implementation of a new licensing standard. Not really anything to do with me. It was purely just it was brand new, and there instead of having a big book of words as medical standards, it was a leaflet, pretty much. And so um, I found myself, not able to take my job with the airline. I'd already resigned from my finance job, and so here I am with no real prospects and nowhere to go. But still realizing that I had this desire to fly, and I could still somehow, if somebody would allow me, I could make money out of flying, and I could enjoy flying, and I could enjoy that as a career. Um, and so I'd sort of remembered that. As I sat in Dublin after they had said, nope, well, we're going to start a process to try and get this, these rules changed, but it's going to take a while, as in years. Um, so I thought, well, I better do something in the meantime. And I remembered that I had in my back pocket actually back in a drawer at home, an FAA commercial multi-instrument certificate. Um, that doesn't allow me to go work for an Irish carrier. It doesn't allow me to do anything. But um, I remember that I had it, and the reason was that I was at a point when I was trying to build hours. I it was so ludicrously expensive to fly in the UK just to build hours and build experience. that I came over to San Diego, and this was in the I think the mid '90s or late '90s or something like that, and I came over to San Diego purely just to spend the amount of money that I was going to spend on getting hours in the UK, and I'd almost get double the number of hours. And the flight school, when I told them my plan, said, "Well, yeah, you can just fly round and round in circles for hours and hours, and it will be very dull and boring. But or uh, how about you just convert your UK certificates to or your privileges to FAA and go do a commercial multi-instrument." And which seemed far more interesting to me, but with no purpose and no end, no reason to do it other than just to do it. And so I was paired up with at the time, a new flight instructor at this place, San Diego Flight Training International, which still exists. And paired up with this instructor that said, "Okay, so you want to do a commercial multi-instrument in about 28 days?" Yep. And so we laughed and joked, off we went and did it. And so, but of course, in the same way that if you have a US certificate and you go to Europe and you can't just go work in Europe. There are rules on immigration, citizenship, and those sort of things. So the fact that I had this FAA certificate didn't really mean anything. It was just a way to build hours, and it was a sort of keepsake. It's like, oh, this is fun, and that was that. Um, well, when it came time that I had nothing, no job, no prospects, no UK license anymore, no Irish license, no nothing. I remembered that I had that certificate and thought, well, I'm not allowed to go to America and work in the US. That's not an option. I'm a UK citizen. I'm not a US citizen. Um, but I do know that there are American registered airplanes in Europe. And so that would tie up with my qualification. And maybe I can keep flying and just make a bit of money to pay the bills. And so that's what I ended up doing was to go. I just decided I'm going to drive to all of these airfields. Every airfield I go past, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and find any N-registered airplane and see if the owner or the company that owns that airplane needs a pilot for any reason whatsoever. And so I managed to start to do a little bit of flying with different people. And um, and then I sort of, again by accident, I got involved with a brand new company back then called Cirrus, that we all know now. But back then they were brand new. And I got into to demonstrating Cirrus aircraft in the UK. So I would take them to prospective owners and I would fly them around. And, this was just a nice way that I could make a little bit of money and keep flying while the aviation authorities were working on this rule change so that I could then get back to my airline job. Um, and Flying these little airplanes around and basically accepting any job that was offered to me led me to ferry flying. So that again, another accident. None of this is planned so far, Nathan. This is Steve waking up in the morning and having no clue about how to get to the end. But somebody said, "Well, I just bought this Russian yak. Can you go to Russia and pick up this yak and fly it back to the UK?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. What's a yak?" That it's that sort of, you just say yes, and of course I'll do it, and then figure out how to do it afterwards. And and then that led, that was successful. It was, it's a fun story, but it was successful. And then somebody else realizes you just did that and says, "Oh, hey, can you go to Greece and pick up this airplane and bring it back?" Of course I can. Where's Greece? Um, you know, that sort of thing. So that eventually led to to mainly to Cirrus, saying, "Hey, could you come over and pick up these Cirruses and fly them to generally to Europe?" The reason being is that Cirrus is an all composite one piece airplane, so it's so hard to ship it in a standard container box. So you employ people like me to put a big ferry tank in the back seats and fly it across the Atlantic. And so that's what I started to do, and that eventually led to building a pretty successful ferrying business, flying all sorts of airplanes all over the world, and employing some great people that are still friends of mine now, and also people that aren't with us anymore because it's ludicrously dangerous. Um, and that led. I was kind of enjoying myself. I'd achieved my goal, which was to fly professionally. I didn't realize it would be for myself, but I was flying all of these different airplanes all around the world and kind of having a good time and enjoying myself and making a decent living as well. And I had a job to move these British Aerospace ATPs, which are kind of a 75 seat turboprop airplanes. There are four of them in Kingman, Arizona, that needed to go to the UK, and it was a really difficult job because nobody was current on this airplane. It hadn't flown. There were only the last four examples in the US. It only hadn't been flown for 4 or 5 years. Nobody was current. There was no simulator. There was nothing. And so uh, I got the job and then thought, well, how am I going to do this? I'm not sure legally how we can do it. And luckily, I had a good relationship with the FISDO, and and I went to speak to them, and they said, well, find if you can find the guys that flew these in. In other words, some of the last pilots to fly this example, this British Aerospace ATP, if they are still flying something comparable or something, they're current in something of that size, um, go do 3 takeoffs and landings, and you are now a Part 91 qualified crew to go fly this thing, and please don't have any incidents. And that's basically what we did. So as a process, I found one of the pilots that flew an ATP in there called John Geisen, who at the time happened to be the fleet manager at Air Wisconsin, which is a regional that fed at the time United Express routes, on the sort of mid to East Coast routes. And John and I sort of hit it off, and we became really good friends. And and I was sort of saying at the time, this ferrying thing has been very good to me, and I've got some good hit, good stories, but also, there had been some fatalities and pe friends that, didn't make it, or colleagues that I'd heard about that had had issues. And you sort of start to wonder, well, how long is it going to be before I have, an issue that I cannot get out of? Because I have plenty of issues, but one that I couldn't get out of. And I'd also, the big emphasis here was that I had met somebody that I thought, well, I'm probably going to get married. As a weird circumstance, I met an American through a friend in London. And so, I'm now potentially going to be marrying an American lady, and so now it's not just me I have to think about. Now there's two of us, and I'd started to not tell my future wife what I was doing, because I thought it would scare her. So I wouldn't give her all of the details of some of the transatlantic flights or the African flights. I wouldn't tell her the bits that she might get worried about. And I thought, well, this is ludicrous. Why am I keeping this information when we're gonna be getting married? That's not a way to start a relationship. And so I was saying all of this to John, while we were flying one of the ATPs across to the UK, and he said, "If you would quit your whining, I'll pay you $20 an hour to come and fly a CRJ." And I laughed. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, I'm probably going to establish myself in the US now. And it would give me a schedule and it would be airline flying. Do I want to give up my ferrying business, because it was enjoyable and it was very successful. And I thought, sure, why not? And so that began my airline career in the US. That lady I ended up marrying, it's my wife, Andrea. We're still married 21 years later. And uh, yeah, so that began my airline career in the US. I stopped the ferrying. I did one or two for fun or for friends later, but that was basically the end of the ferrying career. And um, yeah, from Air Wisconsin, I I got into to training, became an examiner, and that gave me the resume to join Virgin America when they were brand new in San Francisco. So I had the resume to do that and joined Virgin. Had a great 11, no, 12 years, 12 years with Virgin, and Alaska Airlines bought Virgin. And 59 seconds later, here I am as a Alaska Airlines 737 captain. Career done.
Well, no, that was a great overview, and you made it. So yeah, that was a great overview. All right, we'll definitely take a deeper dive into some of those stories you told, but wow, that was a great um overview and like hearing really how you persevered. And what came up for me there is how much you really persevered. I know there are people out there who probably, are hit with obstacles and maybe they persevere a little, but it doesn't get them all the way to the end, but you just kept persevering and persevering. So, where did that perseverance really come from you? Because it kind of it feels like it had to come from somewhere. So how did that come about for you?
I think that's a great question, Nathan. I think that that comes from the alternative that's presented to you. If you're in my circumstance, if you grow up in surrounded by people that really don't have much. And the whole emphasis is that you just find a job and you go to work and you exist and you survive and you try and enjoy what you can enjoy. And I just didn't want to do that. I just thought there was more to it. I didn't want to be I didn't want to work in a department store. I didn't want to do those things. That's not to say that people working in department stores have got any kind of a crummy job. You can make the best that you can from what you're given. But I just had these sparks that there was something else there that I knew that I could do. And so once I was on the path, I was just too stubborn to give up, I think. And if I ever needed motivation, I could easily have just gone back and scraped along and worked a what I would consider a menial job. But always in the back of my mind, it would burn me that there was something else that I could have done if I had just put in the extra little piece of effort. It's almost like, when you go to a fairground and there's a roller coaster, right? There's a really big roller coaster. And I used to look up at these things and initially think, I don't know about that. But I couldn't walk away because if I walked away, I would never know. And it would nag me for days and weeks later. So the easiest way to do it is to go on the roller coaster. And then when you go on the roller coaster, you enjoy it and you find it's fun. So it's that sort of analogy that um, I can't walk away from that. Once I realized that there was a possibility for a different life or somewhere else to go, then the alternative that was sort of presented and kind of expected that that's what you're going to do. Well, then I can't walk away from it. I need to see. I need to see it, even if it's a complete failure. Even if it's never going to work, even if the barriers are just too big. At least I can go have a look. And And so that was really what kept me going. And there are little milestones along the way that once you've done something, well, okay, well, what's next? What if I did that, then surely I can do this as well. And you look around at your group of friends that are also on the same path, and you think, well, am I really that different? Is it, I think I can do that too. Well, surely, and all of a sudden, all of these things open up, and the possibility or the prospect of going back to to go be a pick up trash or something. You know, it just doesn't appeal anymore because you've seen this little light of this other life or this other world. And again, you're in your mind, you're probably heading for failure. But if you don't try, then how will you ever know? And I just couldn't walk away from it.
Yeah, that's a great reason that you provided of why you should persevere. You never want to look back, now and think, oh, I could have done that, but
Yeah.
you didn't. So I'm glad that you were pushed by that and realized that in time so that it wasn't too late. Because you definitely don't want to be the person that's, telling your grandkids, could have done that, but you didn't. So, but you did see the other side. You talked about your time in finance, in the finance world. And I've talked to some other aviators who have time either before or maybe even after their aviation careers in finance. So it seems that there's sort of a pattern, but do you think there's any skills that are transferable between those two fields?
Um, I'm not sure because I was in I was in a I was in a nasty part of finance. It was purely an advertised job. So it wasn't something that I was desiring. This was purely because I wanted to make money to pay for my flying. Um, but there was an advertisement for a company. It was a finance company, and what they did is they loaned money to people that were struggling at a really high interest rate, hoping that that person would not be able to pay it back. And then they would go after whatever assets they could, and they would restructure a finance deal that would then lock that person in to paying whatever, pretty much whatever they earned for years to come. Or it would be the side that I got into, which was loans for cars, again for people that didn't have great credit. And so you give this money to buy this car, and at a massive interest rate that eventually a lot of people couldn't afford to pay, so they would either have to restructure that at a higher interest rate, or we would go and take the car from them. We would sell the car to a dealer at a low rate, and then whatever the balance was, we would refinance at a high interest rate. You get the idea. This is nasty, 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 horrible finance. I couldn't wait to get out of it. And but that for me was just a job. But you do get to see, especially when I was repossessing the cars, taking cars from people. You realize a car is a lifeline for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you realize you're the face of this finance company, that is basically destroying this person's life, and you realize you're the person. So the thing I would have taken, I definitely took away from that was to be human. I'm coming along. I know why I'm here. I know why I'm here. I'm doing this as a job, but surely we can make this as pleasant as we possibly can. And let's talk. Is there a way that we can avoid doing this? Is there a way that we can figure this out? As it turned out, that some of the owners of that finance company ended up in jail. Not a surprise. It really wasn't. But it's not a pleasant area to be involved with. It was very interesting to see it, and to see the way that some people can manipulate and use circumstance, to just extract so much from people that have so little. It's not a pleasant industry, that side of it anyway. From that, I got into credit management, and that was more normal finance, and more reasonable. Offering a service and offering assistance to people that needed it, and not only existing to try and get as much as you can from somebody. And that was much more pleasant. But I think what you end up taking away from that is that it's not just a number on a piece of paper or on a spreadsheet. It's a person, and it's a life. It's an actual real person. And I think especially in the airline world, I mean, certainly in the ferrying world, I was the only person in my company. It was me. I was the owner, the pilot, the I made the coffee, I did the flight plans, I did all for me. I was the marketing person. It was me and a laptop. So you learn to talk to people and treat them with respect and be human. And sometimes now, especially at the airlines, we have challenging days at the airlines, and I think maybe what I may have taken from my finance days is when those days happen, take a step back, take a breath, and remember we're just all human beings. People just want to be spoken to as a human being, and so I'll explain things as um, you know as simple as I possibly can about what's going on, but I'll also try and keep a little bit of perspective, that the reason that some of these things happen, even though they're frustrating, especially on days when there are delays and things. When those sort of things, those delays and things happen, that there's a reason that air traffic control wants to have a bit more spacing, or things need to slow down, or we stay on the ground for a little bit longer because of safety. You want to have this as a safe system, and that if you sometimes explain that to people that are just expecting to get on an airplane and be at a certain place at a certain time, then I think you get a much better reaction, if you just talk to somebody as if they're a human being. Some of that may have come from the finance side. I'm not sure. Not really thought about that before. You got good questions.
No, thank you. No, that's a really great answer that you brought up there. Be human. I think, yeah, I've definitely, I try to do that too. I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that's something that could transfer, but I guess as a pilot, getting on making an announcement to the passengers, treating them like they're human. I think that kind of, before takeoff maybe is having that connection with the pilot. I think that's probably really important, and I'm glad you could have taken that away from finance, and glad you
Yeah,
shared that here. I hope people who are listening will take that away from this episode as well as, be
yeah,
human.
yeah.
Um, so maybe you took this into your next job, but one of your jobs that's really interesting to me, at least, is your job as a ferry pilot. So I
Mhm.
want to dive a little bit into that. But first, do you have any stories you can share? Because that sounds like an insane job. When I first heard you talk about that on Brenton's podcast, I was thinking
Yeah.
that is an insane job, and I don't know if they still do it. But do you have any crazy stories from that job?
Oh, a million.
Have any you want
You,
to share?
your 60-second question, we could be here all night, honestly, Nathan. So no. The ferry flying thing, again, none of it was planned. I didn't wake up and think, oh, what I want to do is become a ferry pilot. And just to explain, most of the early ferry flights that I did were in small kind of Cessna Piper, four-seat, single engine airplanes that are not designed to go across the oceans. I mean, that's just not what they're designed to do. And so the to actually prepare an airplane to go across the Atlantic, as an example, is quite a feat. You have to take usually the rear seats out, create a structure, a platform, put in a generally 100 gallon tank, plumb it into the fuel system, have a valve system, have it inspected, have it signed off by the FAA, get an overweight certification, look at performance, all of these sort of things before you even get into the air. And then strap yourself in to this, flying bomb and go fly. Back then there was no cell phones or satellite, data links or anything like that. You would get your weather. There was a hand sketched drawing of fronts and lows and what somebody estimated the weather might be somewhere across the Atlantic in 4 hours time, and you got it as a fax. And you would sort of look at it, and it was generally those weather charts were made for the airliners, not for somebody flying at 10,000 feet, for 15 hours. It's just not made for that. But you would extract as much as you can from it. And so these airplanes, we'd have to put high frequency radios on them and fill them up with as much survival equipment as you could, staying within the weights that the FAA had approved. It's not a great situation to be in, and you sort of have to have a conversation with yourself before you start doing this as a career. That if if you're halfway across the Atlantic and the engine quits, you're probably done. Let's be fair. There's not a life raft that you can put inside a Cessna 172 that you can pop out and jump into and float around for a month and get picked up. It's just not going to happen. So more than likely, that's probably it. And so you have to be comfortable with that as well. Um, Now the airplane doesn't know it's over the Atlantic. There's no reason for these airplanes that are, very, very reliable. There's no reason at all for them to have any issues. But I think you just have to prepare yourself for that. And once you've had that conversation with yourself, you can move on and you can just go fly. Um, and there's a lot of people that do these hops across the Atlantic, from Goose Bay to Narsarsuaq to Reykjavik and down through Europe in the summertime. It's fantastic. Anyone that wants to do that, go do it. It's fantastic flying through the fjords and things like that. But the actual doing it as a job, as a paid job, at all times of the year, becomes quite challenging and difficult. And of course, that also means because you're in this environment where you have back then very, very little weather, reliable weather information. You're out of radio range. There is no radar. Back then I didn't, the satellite phones were so heavy you'd never take one. It would you'd never get off the ground. And so in airplanes that were not designed to do this, single pilot without any autopilot or anything else, for 15 or 16 hours. And you think, okay, well, there's a recipe. If ever you wanted a recipe, you talk about the Swiss cheese thing.
Yeah.
All of the holes are open now, and there's just one left. And um, but you know that was the way that I flew, and the way that I could earn my money, and keep flying and fly all of these weird and wacky airplanes around, which was really exciting. When somebody would say that they had an airplane that was unusual, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. I wanted to fly different things. I wanted to go to different countries. This was equivalent. This was my education. It was my education of the world and cultures and people around the world, um, as well as flying different airplanes. Um, but it's an environment that's very, very dangerous. And so uh, as far as stories, the ones that people I wrote a book in 2017. It wasn't intended to be a book. Not a book to be sold anyway. It was intended as um, me trying to write down stories of my ferrying days, before I lost my memory. Because my dad at the time back then had been diagnosed with a strain of Alzheimer's, and I was flying with a good friend of mine, one of our captains now, Matt, and he sort of said, or I told him a silly story, and he sort of said, wouldn't it be interesting if you also lost your memory, and then years later you reread your stories, what would you think of this guy and what he did? And you would think he was crazy. You think, why would he do that? And it was a really fascinating way to a fascinating question. And so I started to write down a story, and it was basically just two paragraphs. And And Matt looked at it and said, oh, okay, that's cool, but who is this guy? Why are you there? How did you get there? Expand, expand. And well, I don't know about that. And so I just started to write and write and write. And just over time, I started to develop, I just sort of picked 10 stories. Um, and that had some interest in them because if you're flying a Cessna for 15 hours, 14 hours of that is going to be dull and boring. And so if you want to write 14 hours of dull and boring, it's not going to be much of a story. So of course you cherry pick the highlights and you create the story from that. And so I started to write these things down, and over time I sort of thought, oh, that's actually a complete story there. And then I thought, okay, well, what I should do is I should get this put into a book, not to sell. No one's ever going to be interested in this, but just to print it and give it to the people that I used to bump into. So the FBO ladies at Woodward Aviation in Goose Bay, the guys at in Keflavik at the FBO, these people around the world. I could give them this book and they could read these silly stories and see their piece, but also when I left them, what happened next? What was Steve doing when he left your FBO? And so I started to put this together, and I had the 10 stories, and then another friend of mine, Julius, read it and said, "But I want to know why you got into ferrying." Kind of your question, your 60-second question. So that became the first part of it. So it's sort of and I really didn't want to write that. It's sort of brief, because for a reason, because I wasn't writing it to sell it. I was just kind of putting down, well, this was the story of how I got into the ferrying, and now here's the 10 ferrying stories that are somewhat interesting. And so I put it all together and got it published. And I was, when you self-publish something like this, it automatically goes on to it's available on Amazon and those and Kindle and those sort of things. And so I didn't know this, but a UK flying magazine called Flyer Magazine picked up the book, and somebody read it, and they wrote a really nice, very glowing review. And this was just before Christmas. And all of a sudden, people were buying the book. And I thought, whoa, hang on a second. That's not what I was that's not what I was thinking. And so yeah, I kind of felt weird that people were buying this book. I mean, who wants to read about me, uh, but anyway, I thought, well, I didn't feel that comfortable about it. But I thought, okay, well, what I can do is I can donate the proceeds to a flying charity, and that will make me feel better. So that's what happened. And so yeah, so as far as the stories that I put in there, I don't even remember now. I wrote it in 2017. Um, there's general in the Cirrus, there's um the problem with the weather back then, again, is there was no data link, there was no satellite, there's no cell phones. You're relying on pieces of paper that meteorologists have put together hours and hours before, um, sort of best predicting what they think is going to happen. And you know how the weather is; it's never going to cooperate. And if you're a weatherman, it's always going to make you look stupid. So, but yeah, I remember. I remember flying up through Arctic Canada, in a Cirrus, one of the early ones, one of the early Cirruses, and the big thing that differentiated the Cirrus between other GA airplanes like Pipers and Cessnas and things like that was that it had the parachute. And I thought, well, I'm never going to be using that. That's silly. Um, but I did find myself in, out of radio range in Arctic Canada, just to the where was it, northeast of Shabugamu, and could with nobody, and ended up getting into really bad icing, unforecast, nothing on the chart. And so I had no idea where the quickest exit was. And this particular Cirrus did wasn't ice, wasn't icing equipped. So, you would think, okay, well, I'll go down. Well, this was nighttime, and below me were mountains, high mountains. And so you think, okay, well, this isn't looking great. And I can't talk to anybody, and I'm not really sure where I am. And I've got a vague idea, but I don't know where the peaks are. Back then, there was an inherent uh, error built into GPS because the military didn't want civilian users or other governments or militaries to use accurate GPS. So they inherently built in an error. So you didn't quite get the GPS that you get now. Um, and so it got so bad that, the whole airplane was covered in ice. And I just thought, well, the only way is down, and it'll be down until I hit something. And nobody's going to know I'm here. I'm done. Basically, there's no way. Um, but then I thought, well, okay, I've got the parachute. So at least if I came down this way instead of going in this way, perhaps it would be survivable. Nobody would still know where I am. It's still wintertime. It's still the middle of Arctic Canada. So I'm probably not going to make it, but I'd have a shot. I'd have a bit of a chance. And I remember I kept broadcasting just randomly on the radio just to see if there's anybody out there. And I finally heard a voice, and I was able to give a basic idea of where I was. It was a RCAF flight. It was a transport flight, I think. And they took down, kind of roughly where I was, and my predicament. And I thought, right, game on. It doesn't matter now. If as long as I don't die from the crash, I've got a chance, because they now have an idea of where I am. And so I was ready to pull that parachute. And so I just had to figure out when, because I couldn't see anything. I was in cloud, it was nighttime, and I was sort of waiting for the last moment, that something would come into view, and I think, right there, go, and I pull. And I sort of knew that 4,000 was about as low as I could go without hitting some of these mountains. And I was getting pretty close to that. And, I was ready to pull this thing, and there was this big jolt, and this bang, 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 bang on the airplane. I had no idea what that was. That was a new thing, these noises. But I realized it was the ice coming off, um, and that my airspeed had sort of increased a little bit. And I tried to go up a little bit, and it did. I thought, oh, okay, there's still maybe a peak in front of me, but the airplane wants to fly a little bit more, and so before that, it wasn't flying at all. It was only going down, and it just started to go up and up and up very, very, very slowly. And so I forgot about the parachute, and just started to go up. And in a second, the whole windscreen just cleared. The ice disappeared. Ice went from everywhere on the airplane, and I was in smooth, starry night, and that was it. And you think, whoa, that was so that just that little piece, you know, um, you process it afterwards and just think, that's crazy. That all of these things went through your mind. You had different range of emotions. You had a different plan, a strategy. What was going to happen? Who knew that you were there? How could you communicate to the outside world? All of these things were happening. That whole thing probably took 5 or 6 minutes. It was nothing. But when you tell it as a story, and that was actually the story that I told Matt when he said, "Why don't you write something down?" And then to try and turn that into something that's articulate and something that's entertaining on paper, is that was then the challenge to write some of these stories down. Um, anyway, that's one.
That was a great story. That actually reminded me because I want to say it was about a year ago. there's an airport near my house, and we there was a Cirrus that had actually, I believe they had an engine problem and parachuted down about a couple blocks behind my house. And I'd
Oh,
never heard of
wow.
the Cirrus parachute system, but it's really a genius system, and I'm glad that the pilot was okay. The
Yeah.
plane was a little, beaten up,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pilot survived, and that's what counts. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you didn't end up having to use it, but I'm glad that it has helped people.
Yeah.
So um,
Well,
yeah.
I got to be honest. I mean, I the thing that was really I remember afterwards thinking about it. The thing that annoyed me the most is that I wasn't going to be able to deliver this pride and joy, this brand new airplane to its new owner. I was more annoyed about that than anything. That I had failed. I would be failing to deliver this airplane to somebody that was really looking forward to getting this Cirrus. That had paid their hard-earned money and they were expecting this guy to turn up and deliver their airplane. And I was really annoyed that I wasn't gonna be doing that. But as it turned out, it did, so it was fine.
Well, hey, happy ending there. But that leads me into my next question perfectly, which is about what kept you alive and what you think actually, maybe it was luck, maybe it was skill, maybe a mix of both. But you mentioned earlier that you'd had friends who were in the industry that didn't make it. So I guess my question there is, what kept you alive, and how are you sitting here today?
There's no two ways about it, Nathan. Luck played its part, through things that I couldn't control or I couldn't do. What I did was do the best that I could with the things that were thrown at me. Um, and so, um, yeah, I mean, when I think back to some of the people that I'd worked with that became friends that aren't here anymore, almost all of those instances where they passed away in the crash were nothing to do with the airplane. And it's really hard to think about that and to say that the airplane was fine. Um, but I'd either pushed it too far, or there's that just keep just a little bit further, or some examples. Going into Greenland, into Narsarsuaq, coming from the west into Narsarsuaq at these sort of altitudes for that these GA airplanes fly. There's three fjords, and you have to go to the middle fjord, and that will take you to surrounded by these sheer cliffs. It's gorgeous. It's the most stunning thing you'll ever see, but it'll take you to Narsarsuaq Airport. The other two are dead ends. So and you learn, and this is perhaps answering your question in a roundabout way, but you learn and you listen and you prepare yourself. So you don't just go fly off over the Atlantic. You have a good understanding of what you're getting into. You go for the middle fjord. And now I'm thinking of one ferry pilot that isn't with us no longer, or isn't with us anymore. And back then, the GPS system, again, it wasn't great. It wasn't very detailed like it is now. It was sort of more blocky,
Hmm.
and it didn't really map the terrain very well. Today it's stunning. The technology has gone in my lifetime is just it's gone to crazy levels as far as I'm concerned. But back then it was sort of a block diagram of a coastline, let's say. So that middle fjord was depicted on the GPSs back then, but not very accurately. And so what this one ferry pilot decided to do was to keep the wind while they were high, and then descend into the fjord in IMC, um, and break out into the fjord and follow the fjord up to Narsarsuaq. Unfortunately, there's a big rock that juts out from the side of the mountain, and it wasn't depicted on the GPS. And so, as he descended down into the fjord, using this map data as his way of navigating, he smashed into the rock. And you just think, man, you know the rules. The rules are you descend over the ocean because there's nothing to hit. So you descend over the ocean, you become visual, then you pick your fjord and you fly down the fjord. Um, and that's a that's sort of a basic understanding that you learn and you have in your back pocket. That's why somebody would pay a ferry pilot for those snippets of information that means that your airplane is going to make it to where, to your destination. And and so those sort of things, when they happened, as you do, as I do today, and I'm sure, a lot of pilots do, whenever you hear of a crash, you don't immediately react. There must be a reason for this. And you take a step back and you take a breath. And my question to me is always, could I have done that? Is that something I could have done? And that started back in the ferrying days when, when there were incidents of people that I knew. And so that one, I would think, is that something that I could have done? And no, it's not. I would never, ever descend down into a fjord in IMC using this old blocky GPS data. It's suicide, as it turned out. It was. But the question is then why? Why did you do that? For a little bit of extra airspeed? Was it that the fuel was low? What was the reason? Was there a reason behind it? Um, and so, I don't know the answer to that, but I think that, the thing that kept me safe, I think, was trying as best to understand those situations, trying to learn from others that had issues. It was a very solitary, sort of solitary, soul-destroying life. You're sort of a nomad on the road, and the people that you run into, other ferry pilots, they're your competition. And so the chat and the talk in a bar somewhere would not really be analyzing weather patterns or things that had happened in different places. You wouldn't want to give away that kind of information. But then when, if somebody had an incident or there was a fatality, then you could certainly, the conversation would start to flow. And that's where you would learn, you'd learn things. Or if somebody called you and said, "Look, I'm thinking of doing this flight. What should I be on the lookout for?" Of course you'd want to help somebody out and make sure that they were safe. Um, but I think that just being prepared with that knowledge and listening to other people with experience really helped. I also think, I used to keep I've got them upstairs here somewhere in a box, but I used to keep logs every 15 minutes religiously. I would write down a whole list of parameters, not any numbers that I could get from this airplane to try and figure out what my actual airspeed was, where the winds were coming from, how the engine was doing not just is it in the green, where in the green is it? How was it in the green 45 minutes ago? And that would, number one, it would keep my brain active. So it would keep me awake. It would keep me in the game. It would also, I would then look at the paper, drawn weather charts, and I would try and translate where I was with how the prediction, what the predictions were, to see if things were changing and how they were changing. So I think that you then very quickly learn to have an appreciation for weather systems, how quickly they move, how slow they move, what kind of weather is generated from what kind of fronts, what you can expect. And so I think those sort of things, armed with that knowledge, that's probably what helped to keep me alive. Luck definitely played its part. And there were some people that pushed it, didn't make it, and a lot that pushed it that are still around today. But yeah, I think it's not certainly something. It's not something as a professional paid pilot that you could just jump in and go to try and build some hours. It's not that kind of a profession, and so you try and approach it as a professional because you're being paid to do a job, and with that comes the same as the airline flying. You're prepared. You know what to expect. You know when to say no. You know when to turn around. You know when tomorrow is going to be a better day. You know when to take the pressure off of yourself to be able to complete the mission safely. And so I think all of those things probably help to allow us to have this conversation today.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill you talked about, learning from other people's mistakes, learning from your own too, like the
Yeah.
the story you told earlier. And luck, I'm sure, is also involved, like you touched on there.
Hmm.
But very lucky to, be sitting here today and telling these stories, and be able
Yeah.
to talk with you. So, but yeah, let's move a little bit into the less, I don't want to say less risky, but maybe a little bit less risky flying, the airlines. You transitioned, like you touched on earlier in your 60-second answer, to Air Wisconsin. And so what was that transition there, and living life as an airline pilot?
Yeah. So yeah, the Air Wisconsin thing came as an opportunity that I wasn't expecting. It was again just circumstance. And so when I first got into it, I don't know, maybe pilots are all the same way with this. I don't know, but you just want to achieve that first thing. It's like, oh, let me get through the training, and then that'll be fine. It can all stop after this. As long as I just achieve I get through the training. Oh, let me just go fly one flight. That's all I want to do. That'll be fantastic. That'll be so cool. Go fly one flight. Oh, what if I just flew one trip? Wow, that then I'd be happy. I'd be satisfied after that. And of course, we're never satisfied. It's like you want to just keep on going and keep on building. The airline life for me coming over here, I my first base was Chicago, and I had flown a lot. I was pretty experienced, but mainly in GA aircraft, in smaller aircraft. And this was flying a CRJ 200, and so my first base was Chicago, and it was in the wintertime, and the reality hit that, oh, this is busy. This is hard work. This is a lot going on. There's a lot of knowledge that I don't have of the airline world. Um, the nice thing is I'm surrounded by people that do. So in the same way with as the ferrying, you start latching on to these nuggets, and how does this industry really work? How you know what do I need to be on the lookout? What do I need to know about Chicago? Back then it was do not stop. You go this way clockwise, this way counterclockwise. If you go to the penalty box, go to this place. With all of this little tribal knowledge nuggets that you pick up. Um, you try and have an understanding with the controllers. What are they tasked with, and how can you fit into what they want to do? Then you also the thing that I hadn't had before, passengers you know, when I'm a passenger, I'm a terrible passenger. I want to know what's going on. I want somebody to tell me. And so when I have that opportunity, I want to be that communicator. I want to always think that I'm talking to the nervous flyer on board. Every single flight I've ever flown as an airline pilot, I'm sure I have at least one nervous passenger on board. I'll speak to that person indirectly every time I make an announcement. Those kind of things I learned from flying with people that had that kind of experience. And I took all of those things from them. And it's why I like the system here. I like the system that you start out, generally speaking, you'd start out at a regional. It's not to do with the size of the airplane. It's just you're doing multiple legs. I think that's fantastic in high density, busy airspace. And you either step up and you learn how to deal with that, and to flow with it and understand the system, and take the experience from the people that you're flying with, or you don't. If you don't, it's going to be a really hard job. And so I stole a lot of nuggets from the captains that I flew with. And then when I became a captain, of course, I put myself into the position that, okay, if I was the first officer turning up today, how can I make this as easy as possible for this guy? Create that environment, try and to have this flight go as easy as possible, but also enjoyable. I got into aviation not for money. That the money didn't exist when I was getting into aviation. I got into it because I love to fly, and I wanted to see where I went next, and I wanted to see what I'd fly next, and I what opportunities would come up next, And I'm still on that journey. That's still true today. But you want to, as much as possible, even on those challenging days, you want to. The worst thing I can think of is you have a challenging day and it's a horrible environment in the flight deck as well, that you're just feeling down and depressed and negative. I can do something about that. I can change that. And so, those are that was the transition, was to try and learn the idiosyncrasies of airline flying and flying with passengers on board. And it's just fun. It's another challenge. It's something learning things it's I like to learn. I like to try and understand. Um, the danger with airline flying is that it becomes repetitive, which is it should, because that means we know what to expect, but it also becomes boring, so you're always looking for that next challenge. And so, that's why I think some people change fleets, change seats, become instructors, or do other things, to change up their flying. I know, you're talking about Brendan, some of Brendan's videos of the Southeast Alaska and things like that. That's challenging flying. It's fun flying. So, a little bit of a mix of flying, and to try and keep it fresh. Um, and there's a lot of changes that happen in the industry, and so trying to keep up to date with the changes, the regulations, the procedures, and things like that. Certainly, as a captain, I only fly with me as a captain. The first officers see 50 different captains, and they see how those captains work. And I'm always interested to know, what am I doing that's, different to other people, as far as, things that I can improve on to make your life easier, or are there things that I do, that I should stick with, that you enjoy, that make your life easier, so those are the things that I can think of today. So yeah, it's definitely a job that it would be easy for it to become boring and repetitive. um, and you're away from home, you're on the road, you're mixing with people that, some you're going to get along with, invariably some that you're not. And so it would be easy to fall into the trap of, this being a chore, and a thing that, I gotta go to Honolulu today. That's crazy. All you have to do is think back a little bit to when you just wanted to get through training, or, oh, if I would have succeeded if I just do one flight in a passenger airliner, or, oh, if I just make captain once, or all of these things you think back at. And, to put everything back into perspective, I think now, I can do that quite easily, and just look back and think where you come from and where I am now. It's insane, that I can do this. And so if I don't enjoy this, the whole thing's been a waste of time. So the transition into airline flying has been fun, challenging, but very, very rewarding. And I enjoy it today. I'm flying tomorrow, and it's great.
Nice. Where are you going off to tomorrow?
I go to Lahui tomorrow.
Oh, nice. So you got the
Terrible, right?
Oh, it's a chore. I was gonna ask you, and I wrote this down yesterday. It seems so. You are the first career airline pilot that I've had on. I've had some others on who have gone from the military into the airlines. But you brought up that it can sometimes seem repetitive. And I remember a couple months ago this summer, I went up to a lake near my house, and my dad and I were watching seaplanes take off, and he was telling me, the thing they have to think about is this isn't normal. Like they could hit a bird, and they have to be ready for that. And I think
hmm
that's similar to what you're saying now. Do you ever feel like your passion for aviation itself, sort of starts to fade? Because, maybe it can feel repetitive of I'm just bidding for a schedule, I'm, just going on a trip. It's repetitive. Does that passion for aviation itself start to fade over time?
you're right. You're right on this. These are great questions. yes is the answer. It can easily go down that route. That you're, oh, I got a bid for next month. Oh, I've got a medical coming up. Oh, I've got, all of these things can definitely they can take away that passion easily. Um, the nice thing is that aviation is full of people, and people are great, and people have personalities, and all you have to do is poke a little bit to try and find some of those personalities. And there's some fascinating people in our industry. That's why what you're doing is, and Brendan and others that produce these podcasts, there's stories everywhere, and you're thrown together with these people for just a few days, or even just one day, one overnight or something like that. And that's your opportunity to find out who they are. Or if you already know them, to update on, how are the kids doing? It becomes more of a family environment. That takes away, some of that. But for the actual flying, what I have found is my passion for flying was massively reinvigorated by getting back into GA. So flying little airplanes around. So my wife and I have a little Grumman cheetah that we love flying. It's nothing special. It's an old airplane. The paint's awful, but it's a lovely little airplane that just flies around. We put gas in it and we go travel, and we enjoy it. And I can take friends up, and we can really enjoy that little airplane. And of course, I have my de Havilland Chipmunk, which was the first airplane I flew in. So I have my little passion and my love affair for that. And it's a it's a it's hard to keep that airworthy as an old ancient airplane with that doesn't, you can't go to Aircraft Spruce and buy parts for it. These are parts that haven't been manufactured for so many years that it's hard to find these parts and keep the airplane airworthy. So that opens you up to a community of owners that all have the same passion. That then you have more friends and more opportunities that lead to going to Oshkosh, that lead to go to formation flying, that lead to all of these other things in aviation that are out there waiting. That if you get stuck in, let's say, flying an airliner around and bored out of your brains and not enjoying the job, and not what you thought it was going to be, and losing that passion for aviation, well, you're keeping yourself there, because there is so much more out there as far as aviation is concerned that you can go and do. You talk about seaplanes. I remember going and getting my seaplane rating years ago, in Bangor, Maine, in a little 182 on floats, and it was insane. And, it was an experience I never expected, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I had great instructors that put me into situations that were fun, and that we'd land. They challenged me to land in a little pond, and we'd land, and you think, and they say, "Well, there you go. You just landed in a pond," and I'm like, "This is insane. This is so much fun." And then they would say, "Well, how are you going to get out?" And you think, "Wait, how are we going to get out? There's not enough room for a runway here." And of course, you do the circular takeoff, and all of these things are out there waiting if you want to go and enjoy it. Aerobatics, or formation flying, or different types of airplanes, gliders. All of these things are out there. Yeah, I think if you're stuck in a rut, and you're not enjoying the job that you used to dream about, then I think, honestly, you're stopping yourself. The passion could still be there. You just have to come a little bit outside of your comfort and go walk into a flying school, or walk into a flying club, or a gliding club, or whatever it happens to be, and go do something that's outside of your day-to-day job. And what I definitely found was, when I was learning to fly, especially because money was tight, that uh, there was pressure. There was pressure to perform, and there was pressure. I've got a test coming up, and I afford to do some more flying to prepare for the test? And so there was always a little bit of pressure, even though I was enjoying the flying. Back when I was doing my private. Um, when there's not really pressure, when you found the career, and you've now relatively comfortable, and that pressure's been taken away. So I found that if you actually do go and fly GA now without that pressure, the enjoyment level goes through the roof. And I definitely think there's a lot of airline pilots, certainly that I've flown with or that I've seen around the industry. I think they would get a kick out of just going and finding a little 172 or a little Citabria or something, and go relearn to fly, and go have some fun, and go fly somewhere, not because someone's paying you to go somewhere and telling you where to go and when to go, but because you want to go do it. And go find somewhere to go have lunch and all of those sort of things. And also take other people up that you can spark, like people did for me, that took me up and showed me what aviation was about. Yeah. So it would be easy to fall into that rut, but I think there are choices, and so you just need to know about them.
Yeah, I can imagine it could be, but in the past 3-ish years that I've really been learning about aviation is there's so much out there, and you brought up Oshkosh briefly, is that's a great demonstrator. I had the opportunity to go out this past summer, and it's
Yeah.
incredible to see how many different uh parts there are of aviation. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So what are some? I'm really big on this podcast specifically of taking lessons and trying to get as many lessons from aviators as I possibly can. So, what are some important lessons that you want to pass along to maybe future generations who are looking to go into similar careers? Maybe not as dangerous as Oceanic Ferry, but
Yeah.
what are some lessons you'd want to pass along?
Well, let's see. I think there's a few that come to mind. You're doing one of them already. Keep the enthusiasm. Your enthusiasm for this what you're doing is fantastic. This, it comes through, and it gets people excited. Keep the enthusiasm. Um, the the things that come to mind, uh, aviation especially is a small community. You learn that over time. You start bumping into the same people in different environments or different companies and things like that. If you start out with an ego, good luck, because that ego is going to get you into trouble a little bit further down the line. So definitely, I would say when you're starting out in an aviation career, um, check that ego. Be nice to people. Don't belittle people. Don't make them feel silly. Even if you have the experience, if you're doing your 50th flight in a 152, doing the same lesson over and over again, and the person's not getting it, whatever it happens to be, that person, it could well be, because of this industry, the next barrier that you have to your next dream job. That's how this industry works. You end up bumping into people so many times through your career, and it's really nice if you've been nice to those people.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would definitely say that's something to keep in mind. Also, I would say if you have a desire to be, let's pretend, an airline pilot, just coming from my world, um, that's a great goal, but don't focus on that perhaps so much. Make sure that you enjoy getting your pilot's license. The pilot's license, getting your private, is should be one of the most enjoyable things you do. These are the early steps. You're going to have so many opportunities to feel satisfaction and pride and enjoyment, if you allow that to happen. Even if your end goal is to be an airline pilot, don't be thinking about instrument, commercial, multi, type ratings, none of that stuff. Keep that away. Enjoy the private pilot's license, getting that private pilot's license first of all. Um, if at the end of the pilot's license, you think, well, the airline flying thing is still my big passion, then go for it. And now it's going to be a little bit more rigid. It's going to be a little bit more procedural. It's going to be more, the instrument flying, the commercial flying. It's going to be more of that, the ATP. And so that's fine. You're now heading towards that world, but don't lose the chance to enjoy the private license because that should be fun. Um, and maybe that's where you want to make sure that you find the right person as an instructor or the right flight school that has the right attitude. You
Mhm.
know, um, go generally when you walk into these flight schools, you don't know anything about aviation. And so you're sort of relying on these people to steer you in the right direction. But you do have, I'm sure you can gauge whether you like somebody or you click with somebody. And if you don't click with anybody at that flight school, go find another one and see if you do. And somewhere along the line, you're going to find somebody that's really going to help you with um, keep your enthusiasm and keep the training fun because it shouldn't be a chore. And then you can move on to your career later. I think that's what I would throw out. Yeah, enthusiasm, ego, no ego, and enjoy getting your pilot's license.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is really great advice. And you've even provided tons of advice throughout this episode that I hope I'll certainly take away from it, and I hope other people who are listening and watching will take away from it as well. But before we start to wrap it up here, what's next for you? I know you're currently flying for Alaska Airlines.
Yeah.
You talked about your book. So what are you doing now, and what's next for you?
Well, that's a great question. I have absolutely no idea. The place that I'm in at the moment, this is a little rented apartment that my wife and I have. We've moved because of her job. And so the reason we have this place is because we don't know where we're going next. There are potential opportunities in New Zealand for her. That would make things interesting for me. Alaska and Hawaiian Airlines are in the process of merging. So there potentially could be a change of base if we end up moving to New Zealand. There could be a change of base, maybe to Honolulu. There could be that would perhaps lead to a change of equipment. That might be bigger or smaller. I'm not sure. It could be a 717. It could be a 330. I don't know. Or I could stay on the 73. Um, I have absolutely no idea. I want to keep flying the Chipmunk as long as I possibly can. I'm kind of if you owning old airplanes is not a money making scheme. It's a money pouring into scheme to keep these things flying. But there's a reason for it because there's enough examples of people that like to keep older airplanes flying for interest and for what you're doing, the same thing. Keep the enthusiasm, keep people interested in aviation, and asking questions, going to Oshkosh and seeing these weird, old airplanes or brand new airplanes, and asking questions and being enthused by it. And so my job I've seen is that I want to keep the Chipmunk airworthy. And at the time when I no longer fly or I'm not able to fly, I should have amassed enough spares and whatever I can do resources to be able to pass that on to the next enthusiastic person that's going to keep that airplane flying. And so, continue passing that down the line. So I honestly, it doesn't worry me that I don't know what the future holds. I have no idea. Because all along these lines, at every low point during this weird and wacky career path that I've had, at every low point, I've needed that low point to happen for the next high point to exist. So at the moment, I'm in a very comfortable position. But even if things change, which they do in this industry, we know that as quickly as they can, think of coronavirus or something like that, things can change very quickly. Well, from that may stem the next thing. In this case, for my airline, it would be purchasing another airline that might lead to more opportunities. Who knows? So I'm just ticking along and having a ball and having a blast and enjoying talking to you. and
Thank you.
looking forward to Christmas, although I'll be in Honolulu on Christmas. So,
Huh?
but that's okay.
Hey, it's a chore, you know? No,
It's a
that's
chore, right? I mean, it's even when you say it, you think, really? But again, we're going to try and make the most of it. I'm going to meet up with one of the last first officers I flew with at Air Wisconsin, who lives in Honolulu, and so we're going to go have Christmas dinner together. My first officer is a good friend of mine who was a student of mine at Air Wisconsin. So we're going to have basically a little reunion in Honolulu, and that's what we're going to try and do is to make it fun and make it enjoyable, and yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
So I know Alaska Airlines has a couple bases down the West Coast. Which one are you based out of?
San Francisco.
San
So
Francisco.
yeah, live it. Yeah, I mean, we live in the Bay Area,
Mm.
and so San Francisco. Yeah, that's pretty much been, except for a year and a half or so. I've been exclusively based in San Francisco since I joined Virgin in at the beginning of 2008.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense with the Virgin America. Yeah, I'm up here in
yeah,
Seattle, so we've got a huge Alaska Airlines
oh
presence. You know,
yeah,
they basically got their name on everything up here. I'm sure you've been up here with Alaska. But
yeah,
yeah, it's they have a huge presence, and I'm definitely seeing the expansions of them buying Hawaiian and all that. So definitely a lot of expansion happening in the next couple years with Alaska.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, before we end it here, I've had a great time. But if you could describe aviation in one word, what would that one word be?
People.
That's a great word.
That's the only word I can come up with. This is why you do what you're doing,
Oh yeah.
and I love talking to you because I want to ask you 100 questions. I want to know your story. I want to know why you're sat here, and it's the people. The people generate the stories, and that keeps it interesting. There's so many fascinating people in this industry. Yeah, and in the whole of aviation.